Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today. If you're the kind of person who loves taking dense, complex historical texts and breaking them down into crystal clear, structured concepts, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today we've got a seriously fascinating document on our hands. We are going to impartially decode a highly intricate speech. It was delivered by Reverend Sun Myung Moon back on February 1st, 1983, and it's titled The Original World and the Enemy World. We're going to systematically unpack the theological, philosophical, and social frameworks that are woven all throughout this text.
Okay, let's dive into this. The source text actually hooks its audience right out of the gate with a massive philosophical question. Which comes first, life or love? It's kind of like the ultimate chicken or egg puzzle, right? The speech posits that long before we can even begin to discuss the mechanics of human life, we have to understand its origin. And the text asserts that love is the absolute origin. It's the supreme initiator. It argues that before even a single cell is formed, love is the driving force that sets the entire universe into motion. And honestly, this central question acts as the compass for literally everything else we're about to explore.
So let's move into part one, the two worlds.
To really grasp this 1983 speech, we first have to understand that the entire architecture of this worldview rests on a fundamental cosmic duality. On one side of the coin, we have what's called the original world. According to the text, this is the environment originally intended by God, a place of pure, unbroken harmony that is naturally ruled by love. But on the flip side, we have what the speech terms the fallen or enemy world. The text claims that because of a historical human fall, that original ideal was completely lost. Because of this, Moon argues that all of human history has actually developed within an alienated, corrupted reality that's dominated by a hostile force. We are essentially living separated from our original nature.
And dominating that fallen world is a very specific entity. Now, the text doesn't just depict Satan as some sort of vague spiritual ghost or a mythical figure. Instead, it defines Satan as an active, highly calculating destroyer of bonds. The speech claims this entity's primary goal is to actively sever loving relationships, and this happens at every level, starting at the micro level within the family, scaling all the way up to the national level, and ultimately attempting to completely destroy the cosmic relationship between humanity and the Creator.
That brings us to part two, laws of conscience and love.
So if we are currently living in this alienated enemy world, how are we supposed to navigate it? Well, the speech outlines a really strict hierarchy of internal and external rules that dictate human behavior. At the very base level, we have secular laws. The text notes that whether these are dictated by a king or voted on in a modern democracy, these laws are inherently changeable. They lack a truly universal standard of justice. But a step above that is the law of conscience. The speech elevates the human conscience as this universal, unchanging guide that constantly pushes us toward harmony, fundamentally overriding governmental laws. But sitting at the absolute top of the pyramid is the law of love. This is described as the supreme original law of the universe, the ultimate law that even the conscience has to answer to.
So the crucial point here creates a pretty fascinating dynamic. The text states, the conscience follows the law of conscience, but a more important law is the law of love. It firmly establishes that while having a clear conscience might make a person truthful, it's actually the law of love that makes a person truly aligned with the original cosmic authority. Love, in this framework, is the ultimate jurisdiction.
Moving on to part three, harmony over struggle.
To really illustrate this intense prioritization of love and cooperation, the speech uses a fascinating biological analogy. Moon essentially uses this to argue against the communist concept of the dialectic, the idea that progress only happens through struggle and conflict between opposing forces. Instead, he points to a simple embryo. He notes that when a seed is formed, a mother and father's elements don't fight each other for dominance. There's no class struggle happening inside a seed. Nature relies entirely on cooperation and complementary harmony to create new life. The soil, the rain, the sun, they all just cooperate to help that seed grow.
Building right on top of that natural harmony, the text outlines three very distinct stages of human growth. First up is the formative stage, which is where the embryo is nourished inside the mother. Next, we move into the growth stage, where our physical bodies are nourished by the elements of the physical world around us. And finally, the text introduces a completion stage. This asserts that upon entering the spirit world, the human spirit is eternally nourished by the love of God. So the takeaway here is that life progressively builds upon harmonious relationships, not struggle.
But here's the catch. The speech argues that modern society is completely failing this natural progression.
pointing to the U.S. divorce rate, which had hit around 50% in the early 1980s. The text uses this as stark evidence that the modern world is violating that supreme law of love. According to the speech, this statistic proves that society is deeply entrenched in the alienated enemy world and is failing to reach that final completion stage.
Which leads us into part 4, the centrality of marriage.
If the breakdown of the family is the core symptom, the text presents pure, unconditional marriage as the cure. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. The speech shares a surprising, kinda humorous anecdote about a little kitten that was brought into the East Garden residence. Initially, Mother Moon really didn't want any pets in the house, but this kitten persistently followed her absolutely everywhere. Into conferences, into the bedroom, you name it. Over time, just through sheer proximity and extreme patience, a deep attachment formed. The text uses this quirky story to argue that even if a spouse seems entirely incompatible at first, unconditional attachment is built through time and patience. It's just a natural function of the human mind to form bonds if you simply stick it out.
This leads to a highly pragmatic, roll-up-your-sleeves view of romance. As the text puts it, the ideal is something you develop and create in your relationship. The speech firmly rejects the whole Hollywood notion of just stumbling upon a ready-made soulmate. Instead, it asserts that true love is an action. It's a continuous process of creation between two people, and it requires unconditional effort before you can ever expect anything in return.
Finally, let's look at part 5, restoring the world.
Zooming way out from the individual family to the global stage, the text methodically breaks down the theological mechanics of historical redemption, and it does this using the biblical archetype of Cain and Abel. So, according to the speech, God, in the parent role, must demonstrate the absolute utmost love for the rebellious elder son to win him back from Satan. Meanwhile, the Unification Church places itself in the role of Abel, the younger brother. Their required action? They must unconditionally love the enemy first. The text argues that only when this specific condition is met can the Cain entity, which represents enemy nations and communism, voluntarily surrender to true love. And that is what restores the global order.
Now, the speech doesn't just leave all this as abstract, high-level theology. It outlines very specific, practical applications of this law of love in real-world geopolitics. Moon points to historical examples of the younger Abel forgiving the hostile Cain. This includes efforts to have Korea forgive Japan for severe historical grievances, and America uniting with Germany right after the devastation of World War II. He also cites the founding of the Washington Times newspaper. He frames this as an act of loving America, the supposed Cain in this scenario, even while claiming his movement was facing active persecution from the U.S. government at the time.
And in a wonderfully quirky, culturally specific metaphor, the speech even references the 1983 Super Bowl, where the Washington Redskins defeated the Miami Dolphins. Moon uses the Redskins, who he describes as these massive underdogs with seemingly no way to win, as a literal symbol for the Unification Church and the forces of God. The text makes a bold promise. Just as the underdog triumphed on the football field that day, the seemingly outmatched forces of the original world will miraculously win out against the massive odds of the enemy world.
All of this builds to the ultimate, overarching strategy presented in the document, "We want our revenge." In a way, but our revenge is love. The speech absolutely insists that the enemy world cannot be conquered by force, or by violence, or by dialectical struggle. It argues that the single, solitary way to permanently subjugate hostility is through a relentless, voluntary surrender to true, unconditional love.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the provocative thought to chew on. How does this 1983 perspective on love, law, and global restoration hold up against the sheer, overwhelming complexities of our modern world today? It is undeniably a bold framework, one that demands the individual conscience and the universal law of love override literally everything else to heal a fractured reality. Take a little time to reflect on how these themes of harmony, unconditional attachment, and loving one's enemy resonate in today's global climate. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep seeking clarity through the noise.